Hi everyone. Welcome to Writer's Lunch this week. As you all know, it's the fourth Thursday of the month, so this is our Ask an Editor. It's the fourth Thursday. That's the only reason I knew that we were doing Ask an Editor today. It's because I counted the Thursdays. I was like, oh shit, it's the fourth Thursday of January. But yeah, so we're doing Ask an Editor. As you know, every fourth Thursday of the month. So this is our Ask an Editor edition of
I want
Writer.
to say usually it's usually the third Thursday.
Really?
It is because we try not to hit Thanksgiving. So,
Oh,
so it's
well, no,
usually
we
the
moved
third, but
it.
we weren't here for the first because it was
Yeah, we moved it for we moved
New
it
Year's.
for the holidays. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, But yeah, so we are here and we are excited to talk to you guys this week about uh getting it's getting your book started, right? Or like writing when you feel like you can't.
It's both. So
Yeah.
we are talking about starting a book, and that can mean two things. One, opening scenes, opening chapters, opening lines, and also just getting your butt in the chair and actually doing it.
And
So we're going to talk about
organization
both.
a little bit. As you've seen, just starting the new year can discombobulate you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm still discombobulated from
Especially because a lot of people, their New Year's resolution might be to get back into their writing stuff or to start a book that they've been meaning to do for forever. Um, I mean, I always have lots of resolutions, but my resolution, as with past year's resolutions, is to finish my most recent story. Oh, also, hello from St. Louis. I'm from St. Louis originally. I live in Dallas now, where we are about to become the snowy white north. Um, After this, I'm going to go get groceries and brave the crowds. But anyway, so we're going to talk about starting novels. But before we do that, next week, Ian Everett, one of the Tomeworks editors, is going to be talking about creating fictional holidays. If you are writing fantasy or science fiction, or really anything, if you want to create your own religion, create your own culture, and you want to populate that with events and festivals and things like that, he's going to talk about how to do that if you're getting away from the trappings of Christianity, or I guess more common religions in our world. How to make your own. But today we're talking about starting your novel. So let's start off with a fun little icebreaker question, which is your favorite opening line. I will go first because I am springing this on Shannon and Anna. I did not give them any warnings. I'll talk about mine first. My favorite opening line is Marley was dead to begin with, which is the opening for A Christmas Carol. I like it because we tend to forget that in Victorian times, Christmas was all about spooky stories. And it is definitely a spooky opening. That is a great opening line because it sets the tone for the story as being like a little scary, a little mysterious, and it is at odds with what you would expect a Christmas story to be about. So yeah, so Marley was dead to begin with.
Yeah, you can't spring that one on me. I cannot think of my favorite opening line, but I can tell you a little bit about what does grab me. So maybe Anna, you should see if you've got a favorite opening line.
I'm gonna take an even differenter direction with this question because I also can't think of one off the top of my head. So Shannon, if you want to go first, and then I will say my piece. That works for me.
Yeah, so my favorite opening lines have always been intrigue. If you can balance kind of gonzo detail with confusion in a way that like makes me want to know like what the hell is going on. Those are usually the best opening lines for me. Like there's different ways to hook in your audience, but the ones that work for me are the ones where it's just like, the mashed potatoes were mad, right? Like so that's
Something
not my actual
completely
favorite opening.
nonsensical.
Yeah, or like the clock struck 13th. I can't say that that's necessarily my favorite, but the ones that have that sort of intriguing element to them versus like Daphne's, which to me is more like ambiance or like setting tone. So we can go into the different kinds of hooks. I don't know that that's really what we want to do, but for me, like
I'd love to.
finding a way to intrigue me is the best way to like get me to read the whole first chapter. But if you are going to intrigue me and that the mashed potatoes are pissed off about something, that needs to come into the story. You can't just throw an intrigue line in there and then drop it.
I feel like that plays into your preference for fiction in general because you like Gonzo stuff overall.
Oh yeah.
Because like I also want to be intrigued by opening lines, but I think in a different way. I like snappy opening lines. I want them to be short, right? I want it to be short and very impactful. So I'm not someone that's gonna want the like paragraph long, like flowy writing. Like that's immediate turn off for me. But I want it to um be short, sweet, and interesting.
I think for a lot of your stuff, because you like romance is probably going to be funny as well. Because most of the time, romances, they like try to show you the character really fast.
Mhm.
And a lot of romantic characters, they're smart and they have some wry humor. And they just want you to be like, boom, you like this person. This is a person you should be friends with, right?
I will say that romance does not have a lot of memorable opening lines. At least
Oh,
not
okay.
not modern genre romance. They will try to set you off and like you're right that they start very character forward, but they do try to set you off like immediately into action. And so there's not a lot of sorry, my son coming to say hi. Um, there's not a lot of super great memorable lines for modern romance.
So I don't read as much as you do, but a lot of what I do read tends towards like not full romance, but like cozy romance, then also like paranormal, but like lighter stuff. So I do see to in my more limited experience, I see a lot of that. But again, it could just be because of the very specific subgenres that I choose. All right, I'm gonna bug Anna because you said you had a totally different take on this.
Yes, I do. So I hate opening lines. I don't give a flying shit whatever about what anyone's opening line is. I do not care. And I hate that like I don't need to be grabbed by the first line. I want to be grabbed by the first chapter. I want like by the end of the first chapter I want to be in. But like I don't need to be in right at the first line. And I hate that like the publishing industry has put so much pressure on that first line to be grabby, like you have to grab them from the very first sentence. I really hate that personally because it in my experience as a reader, there's so much pressure on that first line to be something that's snappy and grabby and interesting and whatever that the first line often tends to come across to me at least as cheesy or not matching what's happening in the rest of the scene because the author has so crafted that first line to be a hook and then, like, the rest of the chapter is just like, this doesn't really follow what you said in the first line. Or, the first line made me cringe so hard, I kind of don't want to read the rest of the chapter anymore. It's like, I wish we could just let the first line just exist and be grabbed by, like, the rest of the story. And not have to be grabbed by that very first sentence because I think it puts too much pressure on the first sentence.
I
I
think I
I'm
have a reason for that too. And I actually want to get to Shan's thing, but I think I have a reason for that too. And it's because you write fantasy that has a lot of world building and you're required to understand a lot of world building before you can get deep into the story. So if your first line is hooky and doesn't actually help describe that world, it's antithetical to your ideas of what this book should be.
Yeah.
As both a reader and a writer who's like, no, I need to show you this brand new experience and
Yeah.
it's not going to be done with a cheesy line.
Yeah.
while I understand like Anna's point, I think that that comes from just like they're writing bad first lines for their book, right? It doesn't mean that they couldn't write a good line that like fits with it, but I think sometimes people get really attached to their first lines, like hit on something they think is really good, and then their first chapter evolves around it and it doesn't make sense anymore. Um, which is a little bit what I'm dealing with my first chapter for my work in progress, and I love my first line, so we're gonna see if I have to kill it. after everything evolves. But yeah, I had a client at one point where they had a great first line, beautiful, memorable. It immediately fell flat with what came after it. It was not related at all.
Yeah, yeah. And I just, if the first line didn't have to be so memorable for necessity of, being picked up by an agent or a publisher, then the rest of the book could live up to what you say in the first line, or, the first line doesn't have to be this like amazing, mind-blowing thing. It just has to open up your story, right? And like, I wish it could just be a thing that opens up your story for the reader
So
rather than there being so much pressure on it being memorable and mind-blowing for the readers.
I mean, but you're always still going to have a first line, right? I
Right.
think like it's hard to say just let the first line exist because like 2000s YA, it was just like, oh, so and so, like it always started with their full first name, like
Mhm.
regardless of what they went by in the book, like so and so went like down the street. I just it's still going to be a first line, and even if it like needs to match with whatever you're doing in your first scene, I think it's always possible to find a first good line that matches that scene because you don't I don't know how you just like don't care about it. Like not like as a reader. I mean like as a writer, how could you not care what your first line is? Because you're going to have to choose one eventually anyway, right? Like um so why not make it a good one?
Yeah.
right, so I
I
did want to
also
go ahead and
was,
read this first line that Shan put into the chat. Um, she's got Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber, and the first line is, I remember how that night I lay awake in the wagon lit in a tender, delicious ecstasy of excitement, my burning cheeks pressed against the impeccable linen of the pillow, and the pounding of my heart mimicking that of the great pistons ceaselessly thrusting the train that bore me through the night, away from Paris, away from girlhood, away from the white, enclosed quietude of my mother's apartment, into the unguessable county of marriage. So that's a really long sentence and it has a lot of weaving. Um, and I think that's really interesting because that's antithetical to Daphne, what you were looking for in a first line. But I think that tells us like what makes a good first line isn't going to have hard rules that you can necessarily follow. And that sucks.
I mean, like you were saying, is like because I read and write a lot of romance. You're right. It does lend itself to, well, a certain type of romance, right? If you're gonna do gothic romance or like this works well with something that would be gothic romance because you've got a lot of beautiful prose. Um, but like contemporary romance or speculative romance, like I work in, like yeah, you're gonna want something shorter. Whereas Anna in fantasy or sci-fi, something it can hold up to a longer, more world-building sentence. Um, or like I feel like fantasy often starts with a, like I said, world building sentence, right? So it starts world first as opposed to character first, which is what you get with a lot of romance. You're gonna maybe have a more broad statement about the kingdom or the planet or whatever that you are going to be inhabiting rather than something very focused on what a person is doing.
well, that's actually something that I've noticed changing in fantasy, in that like more modern fantasy and even like sci-fi that I've read um like focuses on the character doing something, and that's that, but then it ends up being something cheesy, like, oh, so and so walked down the street, or like, blah blah blah. But it's like, you can I at least can tell when I'm reading it that like the author felt so much pressure for that opening line to be a specific thing. And it just feels it God, it just feels like strained. But I do think like the trend in publishing is for those opening lines to be focused on character instead of world building, even in genres like fantasy and sci-fi. And I don't know if that has contributed to them becoming more cringy with time. or not. But maybe, it's a chicken or the egg situation, but
I think there is, and this gets away from openings, but it does lead into it. But there is a trend in modern fiction because there's more competition, there's more avenues for publishing, there's more competition to get in front of readers, things like that. I think that writing has become very refined in terms of like that dopamine hit, right? So your first line, your first or your synopsis, your blurb on the back of your book, like all of those have gotten so distilled to the most gripping, grabby things possible. And you can argue about whether that's good or not, but if you look at like classic sci-fi or classic fantasy, those like really eased you into it, right? You were not just getting dropped straight into the story the way that we often are now. Same thing with horror, like there was room for the creep, for things to like build up and get there eventually. Things meandered a lot more in fiction back in the day. And now there's no room for that. We have like as an editor, we've trained ourselves to like cut it down, slim it down. We are putting all of these stories in waist trainers to make them the most like compressed they can be to like get to the point, get to the story. So you can argue about whether or not that's good. But let's talk about opening scenes, opening chapters.
one really quick. Ryan
Mhm.
put a first line in the chat that I want to talk about really quick because this is the first line of The Way of Kings. By
Anna doesn't
itself.
like Brandon
So
Sanderson
no,
for the
no, no.
life.
Okay, yes. I am not Brandon Sanderson's biggest fan, but I have given him a fair shake and I just don't like his writing. I bounce right off it. But this first line of The Way of Kings by itself, it seems like a good first line when it's by itself. But when you read it in the context of what comes next, it is so cringy, it makes you not want to read the rest of the book. Like I have read The Way of Kings and I read this first line and I kept reading and I was like, well, this doesn't even like live up to the tone or the style or whatever of the first line at all. And so like the whole book after that felt like kind of a letdown. And so it's like in the context of the book, this is a terrible first line. By itself, seems great. But yeah, that's just my opinion of it.
I've never read the book, so I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
But it is a gripping first line.
hmm
All right, let's talk
It's
about
just the
first
rest
scene,
of the
first
chapter
chapter.
doesn't grab you as much as that. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, we can move on.
So
I'm sorry, everybody's here for your soapbox, I think. Like, but yes, the first chapter, the first scene, Daphne, that's what you were talking
I
about,
really,
correct?
I really want AP to get famous and be put on a panel with Brandon Sanderson. I
Uh,
want it
I feel like
so
there'd be a
bad.
lot of finger pointing.
I
I
I've
mean,
heard
it would
I've
be like me
heard
having to sit down with George R. R. Martin. It would be all the receipts would come out.
from everything that I've heard, Brandon Sanderson is a nice guy.
Sure.
And so, like, I have nothing against him personally, and I feel like we could have a good conversation about writing, but I feel like we would disagree on a lot of things. Writing.
Diametrically
Yeah.
opposed.
Yeah.
Okay, so first scenes. Daphne, you had a question.
Yeah, so where do you drop in your readers? How do you start? And this does change with genre, but let's talk about the ways to where you should start your book. Because a lot of modern advice is start where the action is.
Ooh, I think I've done entire writers' lunches about this one. And it's kind of interesting because you brought up how trends have changed over time. One of the things that I have been doing, like with my family, with we have a movie night every week. And one of the things that my son is into is like comedic mysteries. So we started with Glass Onion, but then we've kind of gone backwards in time. So he's seen Clue. We're gonna watch Gosford Park, I think, next week. And you can tell though by like the Agatha Christie's that we have watched from the 50s and 60s and 70s, the process of introduction is significantly different than the mysteries that have been made in the last 20 years. And again, it's because, the more modern audience wants things quicker. So the advice you may read in some of the like the big name writing advice books like Stephen King's books and things like that will tell you to do XYZ that doesn't seem to work for modern audiences. So it's important to kind of think about like what genre you're writing in and what things have been popular to get a better idea of like what's going to work for you. But as you said, getting closer to the action is more on trend. So if you aren't certain where to start, a couple of things that I would suggest doing would be to go read other books in your genre. If nothing else, go look at the look insides on Amazon of the most popular things that are in the same genre as what you're writing and kind of figure out like, are they actually starting in the middle of a fight? Or are they just starting close to the inciting incident, maybe closer than you would have expected? Or is nothing happening for pages and pages except building, a relationship with these characters? Because if you're seeing some commonalities there, it can give you ideas of maybe how to start your book. You don't necessarily want to like word for word or beat for beat because that's plagiarism. But just to get an idea, read inside of your genre.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that I think we've all harped on reading in your genre many times on Writer's Lunch because it's so, so important to like be able to recognize the genre like the conventions of your genre. And the only way to do that is to read in your genre. Like you can't really truly know what the fantasy genre conventions are unless you are a fantasy reader, a consumer of fantasy. Um, but I personally um, writing fantasy. I do like a slow burn, but and like Shan mentioned in the chat, they like a slow burn as well. I do think that for me, to keep me invested as a reader, there needs to be an inciting incident relatively early on, like within the first 2 to 3 chapters. We need to have like the main thing that kicks off the plot. And something that I've seen not a lot, but increasingly in fantasy is like our books where the inciting incident is kind of hidden and obscured. And so like I read through the whole book and I get like halfway through and I'm still not really sure what the plot is. And it's weird because, my understanding of like the publishing industry and trends in the publishing industry is that like you want that inciting incident to be, clear so that readers are grabbed and they, have an idea of where the plot's going and they know what the main characters are trying to do. But I've read several like relatively recent fantasy books lately where it's like, most of the way through, I'm not even really sure what the main character's goals are. And those kinds of stories I'm just not as invested in as a reader as one where it's like the goals are very clear. We know what the main character is trying to do. So
Well,
yeah,
if
I
you
don't know.
don't, yeah, I would agree with that. I don't want a story where it's not clear what people are wanting to do or trying to do because then I don't have any reason to stay. Like I don't need to know what happens next because it doesn't matter to the main character either.
Hmm.
And so I'm not going to stay for that. But um
John's not here to talk about literary fiction, and usually he hates when I do too. But a lot of what I've been reading recently for pleasure has been near future science fiction, or science fiction about robotics, and AI, and it has tended towards literary and upmarket fiction. And one of the valuable things about a story that meanders there is the exploration of what could be, even if it is not a story-driven aspect of the book. So just wandering around in someone's shoes who is like emotionally dependent on a robot, even if nothing is happening, is really interesting because of the speculative elements. And how that impacts like the core identity of that human being and the human condition. So I can stick with some stuff that does that, but it sounds like what Anna has read, at least in her fantasy, and I don't know that what she read is literary fantasy, is not working for you.
Well, so we talked about the inciting incident, and the inciting incident is different from the hook, right? So the if you go and watch my outlining your novel video that's on our YouTube somewhere, we talk about the inciting incident happening around the 10% mark, which in the like in modernly published books, that's typically where it happens. So 10% is going to be within the first like 3 to 5 chapters, usually like, around chapter 3. But that's different from your hook. Now, your hook needs to happen in your first 5 pages because that's what an agent is going to see. 5 to 10 pages is where you're going to want to have a hook. So a hook does not necessarily have to be your inciting incident. Um, but it does need to be interesting. With things like fantasy and science fiction, your hook can be your world. An interesting aspect of your world, or like a different type of character. Your premise can be a hook in itself. Um, like you can give your hook on your first page, you can give your hook in your first line. Um, but it does need to be in those first couple pages. And I've seen advice for readers where it's like, oh, you should spend your first couple chapters kind of doing a day in the life of your character, set up what their normal is. And that is, I disagree with that advice so hard because you do not want to spend multiple chapters telling us how the world is when you're going to flip it on its head in a minute. We should get an idea of what it is. We should get an idea of who your character is before everything goes crazy. But not multiple chapters worth. That is a drag, and it is going to like even if you have interesting things like a fight or a argument or whatever, if it's not gonna matter in the overall plot, it's too much. You should
Mhm.
be getting on with it pretty early on.
100% agree with that. Um, and I think, isn't it more interesting to introduce like the normalcy of your world in the context of how it's now different because this inciting incident has happened or something has changed? Like, isn't it more interesting to see the characters reacting to things maybe inappropriately because this is not something that they expect to happen? Because, like it's just more interesting to find like what the characters consider to be normal within the context of what is different for them versus having like 2 chapters, 2 or 3 chapters of them just living their normal lives before anything really happens. So
I'm going to give
100%
some
agree.
actual advice here about standard story writing technique, just because we've been kind of talking about our viewpoints. But one of the things that you're going to see in a lot of like outlining styles or like the story grid or what have you, even Save the Cat, you are going to start your story off with a normal world problem. And that normal world problem will show what the normal world looks like, but it should also be interesting and hook in the reader. That normal world problem will introduce the elements that become the inciting incident. So if a thief is running away from a cop because they stole some bread, and then they see a like side of a spaceship, and we're in, I don't know, 1800s London, and you shouldn't expect to see that there. Your normal world problem for that thief, how am I going to eat, teaches you both what their normal world looks like and start showing like, hey, something is changing, something is weird. And we would presume at that point that the aliens are going to be a big part of the story and that inciting incident. So if you're really flummoxed, kind of give yourself a logic problem. What issue, normal world issue, can show the unmet needs of my character, and create something intriguing and enjoyable to read as as a reader? What can I write about that they will want to see about the normal world, but that is problem for character? And how do I integrate that with my bigger story about the aliens or what have you?
So there,
So
oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
So there is, I'm not going to call it a micro trend because we haven't had it long enough to know if it's going to stick around, and it might. But there is a trend in the past like 5 years or so, when webtoons became very big, where your hook or even your inciting incident might be the very first thing that you see. And so that's stuff of like the time I got reincarnated as a slime, or my stepbrother's trying to steal my throne. Like it's there in the title. We know what this story is about, and we are just getting on with like you already know everything you need to know before we're even like stepping into the world. There is no intrigue. We are just going face first into it. And I think that's super interesting. It is an interesting take on the issue that we've been talking about where like there is no like we're just charging forward on stuff. So I'm interested to see if there's gonna be a backlash and we're gonna go more toward like relaxed fiction, like going gothic with things. As a backlash to it because Cozy has come out. And there's been a desire for a little less high octane fiction. Now I will say, so I have multiple times on here championed Legends and Lattes. Love that book, love that series, love the author. The most recent one, I've been having a hard time continuing reading because our character's a little bit aimless. She doesn't know what her goals are, and that's a big part of her character. But it's making it kind of hard for me to continue reading it because I don't know what her goals are because she doesn't know, and so I don't know what I'm here for. What is the point? We're just like on an adventure, and she's just like strapped to the horse as the horse is galloping off. Um, and that's why a lot of writing advice is to give your characters agency. They should be in charge of events that are affecting the story and how the story is moving forward, because otherwise your readers start to be like, what is the point of being here? I'm just watching stuff happen to them.
I do want to say, so Daphne brought up starting the story essentially after the inciting incident or as the inciting incident occurs. It is trending. It's not new. This is something called in media res. So if you're interested in doing that, that is the term you should go look up so you can see other examples of how that's happening and the history of it and, you know, how not to fuck it up.
Uh, okay, so we talked about opening lines, opening scenes, or opening chapters. Let's talk about actually starting a book. So get the butt in the chair, get started with it. How do your stories typically get started? Let's go with in your brain, not just like writing it down, but in your brain.
So I usually ideas tend to come to me as visuals. So when I'm just kind of like letting my mind wander, sometimes I don't want to call it a vision because that sounds really woo-woo, but like it is kind of like an image just like percolates up to the front of my mind of something happening. So like, for one of my books, the first kind of image that got me started thinking about it was I had this idea of like a meteor falling out of the sky and like going toward like a sort of fantasy-esque. I don't want to say medieval because it's not a medieval setting, but like a fantasy-esque city. Um, and and like that's all I had to start with. And then like a whole I kept thinking about that image. And then like the whole I started like writing ideas down and world building and like, thinking about, what is that? What do I want that to be? Um and yeah, then I wrote a book about it or where it happens. So where that kind of vision comes true. So that's kind of how they generally start for me. Like an image or maybe a line of dialogue. Or maybe I just have a really cool like image of a character in my mind and I want to write about that person specifically. So
I don't think people should try to write the way ideas come to me because they're not good. I mean, I guess there's something like so the best ideas I've ever had have always come during time where I've had intense physical strain and then slept a lot. So when I've had norovirus and probably should go to the hospital, but instead lay in bed for 16 hours except when I'm vomiting, then I have incredibly vivid fever dreams with like the most amazing things because my brain is screaming that it's dying. Or if I have like a really bad bout of insomnia and then like fall down from exhaustion for like 10 hours straight, I have some amazing ideas. You should not do that. It's not good for you. But I mean, kind of what Anna was saying, like if you have a kernel of an idea, or most of the time something will pop into your head that, you're in the shower and um, you just have this image that is interesting and it sticks in your brain, and it's like a little bit of brain candy that you start thinking about and start daydreaming about. Those are often, some of the best ways to start your book. And it won't be like, oh, I have a plot necessarily. It's I have this person's face, and they have three eyes, or it'll be like, I can see this setting, I can see this brand new world. Or I've just visualized a murder and I need to write about it to talk about it, but I can't talk to a person about it because they might think I killed somebody, and I didn't kill somebody. This is just in my head. But yeah, I mean, finding the visuals, I think is often helpful for most people. What about you, Daphne?
Um, for people who are familiar with me, and how much I talk about fan fiction, it will not surprise people to find out that a lot of my stuff comes from fan fiction, and not in a very explicit way where I've written a fan fiction and I'm rewriting it. I have done that a few times, but usually where I will play with the ideas of the world, or I will have a new character concept, and then that character thrives and lives on their own to the point where they have their own entire world that is completely separate and all of it's unrecognizable. Um, and so, yeah, a lot of my ideas come from the media that I consume, which is why I'm really picky about what I consume, not in a I only watch good stuff kind of way, but in a I am working on a sci-fi thriller, and so I'm going to read and watch a lot of sci-fi thriller until it is like bursting from my brain. I've been watching a lot of really violent action movies lately, so like John Wick or Jason Bourne, things like that, because that's where my brain is headed. Um, and so, yeah, my character might start off as like, oh, what about an assassin in John Wick's world? But by the time I'm done with them, that's not John Wick's world anymore, and it doesn't even bear any resemblance to it. But I've got an assassin. And so a lot of my stuff comes from that, comes from playing with other people's worlds, until I've got something completely my own.
I think it's interesting because I mean everything is referential to something else, but you very clearly know where your references are. I have a very hard time, having been a voracious reader when I was young, being like, did I come up with this? Did I fuck up and accidentally plagiarize someone else's work? Like, I'm not this smart, right? And so, like, if I have a good idea, I always have to kind of pause and be like, where did this come from?
Yeah. So like my current work in progress, which is a very feminist work, and has some really interesting world building elements. But my very first character from that would have been someone who appeared in the TV show Firefly. And nothing bears any resemblance to Firefly. I retain absolutely none of their world building. I've completely rebuilt everything from scratch. But my first character in this world came from, what if I put someone in what if they met someone like this in Firefly? And so that's, like it's not something where I would even have to give any attribution for that later on. But yeah, that's where it comes from.
Like, it doesn't even reach the level of homage. It's
No,
okay.
no. Honestly, it could have just been any space show, but it's what I was watching at the time.
Now,
Sci-fi's
you
fun.
were asking where ideas came from, but also how to actually perform the act of writing, right?
Yeah. So you've got your plot, or you've got your vibes in Anna's case, and I know you've given a writer's lunch on this. How do you turn your vibes into plot?
Yeah. Um, yeah, sometimes that's really hard. But for me, my kind of process is very world building forward. So, I have a vibe, I build out the world, and then once I build out the world, I start thinking about, the groups of people that are going to live there. And then when I'm ready to like start turning it into a story, um I kind of throw a wrench into the gears. I'm like, what is a problem that this world could have? And then I start kind of building characters who can either solve that problem or make it worse. And then those are the people who become the characters in the story. So, really, like for me, what really turns like vibes into plot is introducing a problem to the vibes. And that's the thing that works for me, I think the best. And like all of the strategies that I've tried, just like sitting down with a blank page and writing until it's until something comes out. That doesn't really work for me. Um, I'm a plantser. I'm not really a planner. I'm not a what's the other one?
You're not a pantser.
Planner,
I'm
pantser,
not a pantser.
and
Yeah, I'm not a pantser. I'm not a plotter. I'm in the middle. I like to have the idea of the problem and like what is this like goal going to be? Like what are the characters striving for? What are they trying to solve or break? And then the story can kind of build itself out from there as I start writing. So,
Yeah, as someone who is an extreme plotter, my my actual like first germinating the ideas starts with a document I call the sandbox, which is where I just put snippets, right? So I've got lines of dialogue or like I like visual ideas without a home, things like that. That all goes into the sandbox until I've got enough of an idea of what I'm working with to put together my plotting spreadsheet. So that's going to be my like what are my main turning points, what are my linchpin things, and working out my scenes from there. And all of that happens before I even like start writing it because I cannot pants anything. That's a recipe for me to meander through things. Um, and so I have never started a book by just like simply sitting down and starting. And I don't recommend starting necessarily with your first scene because if that's not well defined in your mind, you might end up with stuff that you're like largely wasting your time. Um, Not that any writing time is ever really wasted if you're working, but you might first scenes, people get so attached to first scenes and first chapters, and those things are so hard to cut later on that sometimes it's better just not to start with it in the first place.
yeah, I've seen advice before about once you finish a draft of your book, um, like go back and just chop off the first three
That
chapters.
is the best. Okay, that is like the writing advice that most revolutionized my writing. So like my back when I was a baby writer, I wrote my first novel, and I saw that writing advice, and I was like, that's such bullshit. I'm not gonna do that. My first three chapters, they're so important to understanding my characters, and that idea just stuck in my head, where I was like, but what would happen if I did? Right? Like, where do I start with chapter four? And I was like, oh because I realized it was the better place to start, and I had to go chop out those first three chapters. It's
Yeah,
really good advice. You don't have to actually do it, but it's a fun exercise. Like,
yeah,
what happens if you chop out those first three chapters? Is that
yeah,
a better starting place? It
yeah.
probably is, especially if you don't have a lot of experience writing books so
Right.
far.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think like especially for newer authors who, maybe they're writing their first book, and they're like just learning the craft. When you first start, you don't have a good sense of the best place to start a story. And so, you like what I've seen a lot from newer writers is they do tend to start way too far back. And so it does really work well to just like, go in and just like, okay, let's just take off these first few chapters. And now, all of a sudden, oh wow, okay, this is a totally different story. We're starting in exactly the right place. It's almost like magic, but
This is not going to be universal advice, but if you're starting your story when your character is a child and the main action of the story takes place when they're an adult, you have started too early.
yes.
If you are having large time skips or explaining a large part of someone's childhood, you are probably starting in the wrong place. That is
Yeah.
not universal, but it is very likely.
Hmm.
I have a slightly different take because I tend to write character focused stuff than I have an engineering brain. So when I first get an idea for something or I have a character in mind, story is usually either a 180 or a 360. So if the character starts in a good place, you can either rotate them to a total shithole by the end of the book, or you rotate them back around to another good place. And I got to decide, like, where am I going to take this character? if they start in a shithole, are they going to end up in a good place? Or do they start in the shithole and end the shithole? And so that's the first decision I have to make. Like, and then the real thing is, okay, I know where I'm going to start, know where I'm going to end. How do I get them there? And because I do write a lot of speculative stuff, the process is going to be influenced by world building. It's going to be processed by different types of I want to say different types of characters, but it'll be impacted by zombies, or it'll be vampires, or something speculative or supernatural. And once I kind of have a baseline of like, this is the shape of my story, this is the main conflict of my story, I like to go in and actually outline. And I know this is going to irritate Daphne because she doesn't like chapters.
God, I hate chapters. If I could reasonably get away with not having chapters in my book, I would.
Well, from that point, I figure out what the major beats are and assign them chapter space. And you can do this using Save the Cat. You can do this like pretty easily with a number of different outlining tools. I don't love Save the Cat because it's super prescriptive, but often I'll just kind of arbitrarily decide, okay, this is how long I want the book. This is how many 3,000 to 3,500 word chapters can fit in that. So this is approximately where the inciting incident has to happen, where my midpoint is, and where the climax will be. And from there, I will basically do writing prompts inside of those chapters. I know kind of what has to get there, and I know who is involved. And so what are they going to do to fuck shit up to make, to hit those plot beats? Or what are they going to do to win to hit those plot beats? And I will create a summary of what's going to happen in that chapter. And while I'm doing that, I can figure out, okay, I need to introduce this concept over here so that it can actually come into play down here. And I, can fiddle things around and move things around. Um, and then from there, because I've already kind of created an entire story, I can figure out like what my themes are supposed to be and then revise that outline to actually like be like, okay, this is where that theme is touched on. Or this is where I show this kind of low, or this is where I reveal this like terrible secret. And that really helps me when I actually sit down to put my butt in the chair, because I have that outlining document that I mean, normally it's at that point maybe 5 or 6 pages. But I can go back and be like, I don't remember what I was supposed to be doing, or I don't feel it, but I have like a step by step of what needs to get written today and how long it is going to be. And even if I'm really not in the mood, it's not like I'm starting from scratch. I've sort of bypassed executive dysfunction, because it's already done.
Yeah.
And that
I've
process can take a week or two.
Yeah. I've started obviously my process is totally different from yours, but my strategy for bypassing that executive dysfunction and like, sitting down to write and not knowing what to do is the day before when I end my writing session, I will leave like detailed notes to myself for like this is what's going to happen next. And it's just like a, kind of bullet point, like 2 or 3 bullet points of like, this is where we're going after this. And so I can sit down and say, okay, this is what I wanted to happen next. Let's get into it. And it really does. It helps because like I've so many times like when I haven't left those notes for myself, I sit there and I'm like I don't know what I'm doing. You know? So it really does help bypass that like dysfunctional part of the brain
Yeah,
that
I
does.
won't do that for chapters because I don't organize by chapters before I start, but I do organize by scenes. And because I have typically two POV characters who swap back and forth, that's how it's organized. Um, but I will for each scene, I'll be like, okay, what are our goals, right? Are we introducing a character? Are we showcasing the setting? Are we trying to get across this like secret part of the plot? And so like if my goals are we're introducing her, we need to establish, that she doesn't like her husband and that her mother-in-law is always in her business. Okay, that's what we're doing with this scene. And so like keeping those things in mind as I'm working on it. So final question before we end or before we take other people's questions is how do you motivate yourself to get your butt in the chair and actually sit down and start writing it?
I make sure I'm super busy doing something else that I don't want to do.
Procrastination motivation.
Yeah, if I really want to sit down and write, what'll end up happening is that I clean the kitchen and organize the drawers. But if I really want to paint my house, I'll write a book. That's not helpful. Don't take advice from me, guys.
No, it's an excellent thing. If
No, but
you
that
even if you
works,
want to do
right?
it with writing, you can have multiple projects at once. And so if you're stuck on one, you move to the other and procrastinate using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
It depends, but in all seriousness, so one of the things that I also do is teach editors how to edit. And that means I write bad books on purpose to use in my classes so they can figure out what went wrong, and try to help the author improve their story. And so I have to sit and think about a lot of writing mistakes and common issues for genre, depending on what I'm teaching, and infuse a story, infuse a book, or really, I usually write novelettes or novellas for that. And when I do, I have a deadline. And it's kind of freeing to write badly on purpose. I mean, I'm hitting specific expectations for how it is bad, but having that deadline and having a clear reason to write the book, I know what I am conveying. And if you're not writing badly, I also know what I'm conveying. I know what I want to leave the reader with. So having a goal and a deadline are really beneficial, at least for me.
Uh,
um,
Go ahead.
yeah, I try to, and this is hard because life gets busy, but I try to give myself specific times of day when I'm writing. So I try to split my day up, and it doesn't always work. But when I'm like really trying to get a writing project done, I split my day. So like in the morning I'll do, editing stuff, um, administrative stuff, like whatever I need to do. And then like I will go for a walk. And then in the afternoon, I'll spend the afternoon writing because that's when my brain is like the most awake. I've exercised, I've eaten lunch, and now I'm ready to go. Um, it doesn't always work out that way. That's like my ideal day. And obviously doesn't always work out that way. What I have found really helps if I'm really feeling unmotivated, is doing sprints. I do sprints on Discord a lot when I'm really trying to get something done. And it's just helpful to have that timer. It's like, okay, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna write for 20 minutes. And at the end of 20 minutes, if I'm really in the flow, I can keep going. If I'm not, I can take a break. I can get up and stretch. I can, grab some water, have a snack, whatever. And then I'm gonna sit back down 10 minutes later and write for 20 minutes again. And so giving myself that, like, you know, I have set a 20-minute timer and all I'm going to do in this 20 minutes is write. That does help me. It does. I don't know why it helps because it feels like it wouldn't help. It's like, I'm just setting a timer. I could still do whatever, but it does help to have that timer on me.
I get the
I
impression you're being
also
judged. That
Yeah, yeah.
I also utilize sprints, especially so I've got a toddler at home, and so my time is busy. And so while he's napping, I will try to do sprints where I'll do 15-minute sprints, and I can reliably do 500 words in 15 minutes. And so if I do two of those a day, that's 1,000 words in a day, and that's a reasonable amount of progress for me right now. Uh,
Mhm.
so that also works for me. But that is a motivation for that is also still really hard. Just getting stuff done. All right, that is our questions. If we have anyone else who has questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. Let us know.
while people are formulating their questions, I do want to read some things from the chat that we missed while we were talking. Shan says, "I love Gormagast, and it begins mostly with the description of the city and stays that way for a long time." She also said, "In Madame Neville's Weird and other derelictions, there are no characters in any of the stories, but the stories are gripping nonetheless."
That's interesting. Oh, it's on
Pippa,
Pseudopod. Anna
I'm
was
sorry.
featured on Pseudopod. She had a great story on there.
I was on Escape Pod.
Escape Pod. I'm
But
sorry.
they're like
They're
connected, so it's
related.
it's Pseudopod, Escape Pod. Pseudopod is the horror one.
Or
Escape Pod is the sci-fi one. And then they have Pod Castle, I think, is the fantasy one, if that one is
that
still
is
around.
Podcastle, yeah.
Yeah, so but all three, I think they're run by the same people, or like the groups of people who run them are interconnected. So yeah, they're all kind of together.
Yeah, they're all from Escape artists. So if you are interested in
Yeah.
short stories in an audiobook format, the podcast can be found pretty much everywhere. It's been around for over a decade. So lots and
Hmm.
lots of backlists that you can access.
Hmm.
All right. Well, there are no questions. Thank you all for joining us, and please come back next week when Ian's going to talk about making up holidays.